This morning is Wednesday, November 29th, I think, or 30th. Is it 30th or 29th? It's the 30th. Wow. Uh, which means we only have one more day and then it's December, which is awesome. We have three questions here in our warm-up. As is, what is a term? And a term, by definition, and this is the hardest part to remember, is the word expression. So a mathematical expression, or an expression, that is the product, meaning multiplication, the product of numbers or variables or both. Both. B-O-T-H. An expression that is the product of numbers, variables, or both. So for example, and we didn't say give an example, but 2x is a great example of a simple term. It is the product of 2 multiplied by x. If we think about, let's do a different color here. Let's go negative 3x squared y. There's one term, and it is made up, and I'll do it in blue here in brackets. Negative 3 multiplied by x, because x squared is really x times x, multiplied by y. So negative 3x squared y is one term because it is the product of numbers or variables or both, in this case both. Negative 3 being your coefficient, x squared y being your variables. So a term is just that, an expression that is the product of numbers or variables or both. So if it's a number, 2 is also a term, and it has a special name in algebra called a constant. And if we said y is also just a variable, and it too would be just a term, or y squared, which would be y times y, a variable times a variable. Okay, that is a term. Our second question says, what is a polynomial, and what are two different names for special polynomials? A polynomial is simply an expression made up of, or comprised of, more than one term. Of course, a one-term expression is called a what? Brian, what's a one-term expression? That's two terms. Monomial, correct. So a polynomial is an expression made up of more than one term. So if it has two terms, as Brian just said, it's called a binomial. If it has three terms, it's called a trinomial. So if we look at a binomial with two terms, let's do the 2x as one term. That's one term, the product of 2 and x. And then we'll put a plus 1 here as the second term, just the number. So 2x plus 1 would be an example of a binomial. A trinomial, let's make a more complex one. Let's go negative 3x squared y. There's one term. Plus 4m cubed. There's a second term. Minus 5p. Can I fit my p in there? No, there we go. Perfect. That's three terms, right? That would be a trinomial. And the way we know polynomials connect terms together. They connect terms together with either addition signs or subtraction signs. Our third question gives us three expressions and asks us to define the number of terms, its name, and then this thing called a degree. Well, in the first one, we have negative 4xy, which is, we know it's just one term based on what we just talked about. So number of terms would be 1. Its name, as Brian said, is a monomial. Monomial. And the degree of a term and the degree of a polynomial is a little bit different. In a monomial, there's just one term, and we determine the degree of that particular term by looking at the variables. In this case, we have an x and a y, and adding up their exponents. Now, it looks like there's no exponents, but we did talk about yesterday being invisible ones. The x has a 1, the y has a 1. Therefore, if we add those two together, that term would have what we call a degree of 2. The purpose of degrees is a mystery because we don't really use them other than ordering terms by degree. That's the only real reason we use them, is just to rearrange terms in hierarchy of degree. In the second expression, we have, if I can get my highlighter to work here without waiting 9 hours, we have one term, we have 2 terms, and we have 3 terms, all connected together by an addition sign and a subtraction sign. So here we have 3 terms, and because it's 3 terms, we're going to call it a trinomial. Now, because there are more than one terms, the degree is a little bit different. Degree of a term is easy to do because you just look at that. But when it's a trinomial or a binomial or a polynomial, we have to look at the degree of each term. So let's break this one down. Our first term is this. Our second term is this. And our third term is this. This one's easy. It has an x variable with a 3 exponent. So the degree of this term in the trinomial is 3. The second term just has an x with an invisible 1 exponent. So that term's degree is simply the number 1. And the third term, our constant, and I'll just circle the negative sign because it's kind of not really that important, but we'll keep it anyway, has no variable. So because it has no variable, it therefore has no variable exponent, and therefore has a degree of 0. And the way a polynomial's degree is determined is not by the sum of all of the degree terms, but rather the highest degree term, which would mean the first term is our highest degree term, and therefore defines the entire polynomial as a degree of 3. In our last question, well, I lost that one. We have 1 term, 2 terms, 2 terms here, which is called a binomial. And if we look at the degree of each term, this x, y, z, our first term, x has an exponent of 1, y has an exponent of 1, z has an exponent of 1. So therefore, this term has a degree of 3. This term only has one variable, the x, but its exponent is 2. So it has a degree of 2. And therefore, the highest degree term is the first one in our binomial. And therefore, we measure the degree of the entire binomial by the highest degreed term.